I had a career as a professional actor for a while, then I worked in business for about 10 years, and then I started to work with violent adolescents in inpatient hospitals. And I got interested in conflict resolution there because I was working in psychology. I was working with a population that had been involved in violence, had been raised in violent communities, and used violence to solve problems. And so a lot of the young people I worked with had that kind of background. I grew up in the 1960s in Chicago, and so that was a time when there was a lot of tumult on the streets, a lot of protests, and I was, even as a young child, sort of aware of that kind of what we call sort of macro worry, that kind of tension. So those events, I think, prepared me to be in environments like that that were tense. And I found that I had some kind of capacity to help in those situations, de-escalate situations, help people talk to each other. But I didn't really know what I was doing, so I decided to study it. So I came here to study with Morton Deutsch, and he was an extraordinary man. When I met him, he had just retired, but was still brilliant and thoughtful and generous with his time, and spent a lot of time with me and other students. And so I ended up staying here, took my master's, took my Ph.D. here, and then when I graduated, I took a full-time faculty position here and now direct a couple centers. Originally was very interested in the practice, primarily in the practice in mediation. I've been trained as a state mediator. I was interested in negotiation and then consulting, particularly around more divisive social issues in institutions or communities. But through more, got very interested in research, in big ideas, and trying to take big ideas and use science to refine them in order to make practice better, more effective, more useful. My most exciting moment in conflict resolution probably came from one of my original experiences, which was working in a hospital, and it was working with violent youth, and at times some of them would escalate to a degree where they would have to call the police in, they would call SWAT teams in to de-escalate the situation. And so oftentimes I was working there as a mental health associate, as a counselor essentially, but I had relationships with a lot of the people that would sort of escalate. And I remember one particular situation where this SWAT team came in and it got very intense, and this young man had barricaded himself in his room, and they were threatening to break the door down and take him down, and he was threatening to hurt someone if that took place. And it got to a sort of a crazy level of tension, and I asked the sergeant if he would mind if I just tried to talk to him, and he said, "Be my guest." So I knocked on the door and I said, "It's Peter. I wonder if you'd be willing to have a conversation with me." And there was a long pause, and he said, I want you to go away. And I said, "You know, why? Why don't you let me in and have a conversation with you? This is getting bad out here." And he said, "Well," he said, I don't want to see you. I don't want to see you. This is, you know, that's not going to work." And I said, "Well, let's give it a shot." And I opened the door, and he was frustrated because I was there, because he really felt like he couldn't harm me because we had a relationship. I'd spent a fair amount of time listening to him and talking to him about his troubles. And as soon as I walked in, I could feel everything shift, and I could feel him become frustrated. He sort of burst into tears, and he walked away from me. And then I just said to the team, "Give me a couple minutes, I'll be back, and if I need you, I'll let you know." And I quietly closed the door and went in and just sat down. And eventually he worked his way through it. And again, it was pretty nascent in this field. I had had some experiences like this, but nothing that intense. So I wasn't really informed about what I was doing. But what I did know is that because he and I had a relationship that I felt like I could rely on at this point, that it gave me the space to try to intervene and de-escalate the situation. And that was a powerful learning for me, and one of the reasons why I went back to school. I wanted to understand what happened. I learn that the field is a perfect fit for me every day, because I have this great opportunity to study, to work with really smart students who ask me really good questions. Our work is very relevant to the world today, not only to the United States and the tensions here, but internationally in organizations and schools. There's so much relevance to what we do. So I do feel privileged to be able to think and read about it, to be able to talk to smart people about it, and then occasionally to really have an opportunity to apply it either through writing or apply it through actually working with groups and communities to bring them together. And when I do that, I do feel like I'm in, what they call flow, a workflow, where I feel like this is the right place, this works for me. As I said, I've taken a lot of paths to get here, but I feel like I've gotten to a place that makes a lot of sense for me, given my background and given my current level of competencies.